Welcome back to the Israeli Bond Podcast. This is our second episode with Michael Schlank, Executive Director of Sid Jacobson JCC. At our last episode, we went through most of your resume and ended up with getting the NYJ leadership, NYJ camp's leadership in times of great catastrophe.
Challenges, catastrophe is big.
Yeah, you're right. Of great challenge during COVID. And spoiler, the organization was in a very challenging place, but you managed to lift it up and bring it back to power. And I wonder now if you, now after having this experience, if you created some sort of a playbook, how to manage an organization out of a crisis or a challenge.
A crisis is fair. So I think the first thing I would say, Gal, is that when you said, I want to be really clear, when you say you managed it, it's never about one person. And that's the first thing I learned about this, right? Which is not about me managing out of anything. It's about leadership, right? And it's about figuring out the path forward. And so the first part of the playbook is identifying the resources you have, the human resources, the people, and what their abilities are, and who is doing things now that can help you move forward, right? And who are the people who have skills that are maybe untapped? Who are the people who are working at the organization who maybe have ideas about what needs to be done, but haven't had the opportunity to or the ability to have those ideas shared? And so that's the first thing. And all of that is sort of a fancy way of saying building trust, right? And you build trust with people by telling them what you're going to do and then doing it, right? Telling what you're going to do and doing it. And the playbook for analyzing what's happening is really it's pretty simple actually, which is, we talked in the previous episode about my non-medical career, right? There's a concept, it's triage, right? When someone's really sick or people are really sick, they come to the emergency room. And if you're having a heart attack, God forbid, you go first. If your toe is cut, then you go last, right? So you look at an organization. I looked at the organization and we triage. What are the things that are the most important thing? What are the things that we call existential threats? The things that are going to make us not be able to continue to do the work that we need to do. Identify those problems, dig deeply into them, make radical change if you have to, because that's the place where you need to make sure that the agency or the organization is secured. And that might be financial, that might be reputational, that might be legal, that might be personnel. It might be all of them all at the same time. And sometimes you need to deal with a whole swath of those things at the same time, which we had to in this particular case. But making sure that you're fully transparent, making sure that in this particular case, your board and your staff understand why it is you're doing what you're doing and what the outcome is. Change for change's sake is not important. You make change because the way you were doing things before created the problem that you're in now. And so let's identify the problem. And more importantly, let's decide where we want to be. And that has to be, you need to have leadership, but you also have to have buy-in from the right people. And some of it's also making difficult decisions. Not everyone is appropriate for the moment. Sometimes you have to part ways with people. Sometimes you have to part ways with important parts of the organization or programs or cultural dynamics that used to exist. So it's in some places cutting out and some places adding, and some places just, I don't know if lifting up is the right word, or accentuating abilities or skills that people have. And then the final part is identifying outside of the organization. Within the organization, what are the holes that exist, and finding how to fill those holes. Some of that is personnel, some of those are dollars, some of that's ideas, some of that's new thinking, and then putting that together and building a team. Because ultimately, any good turnaround is not about one person, it's about a team, it's about a change in culture.
So it sounds like this year to reorganize the organization was much more busy than a regular year for a camp CEO, for this organization CEO. And you mentioned change, and I wonder because people don't like changes.
They don't,
and it's and it's all about trust, because there is this trust issue. You like trust with your leadership team, with the camp personnel.
That's right.
Also trust with the parents.
Yes.
That had a lot of trust, either from a health perspective, either from other perspectives. So you need to build trust, but at the same time you do some radical changes because you have to. And how does it correlate? People doesn't like changes. People tend to stay. We see it in governments. We see it, in hairdressers.
Yep.
So people don't like change.
Hate change.
Even if they don't like their current state,
That's right.
They hate change more. So how do you build trust in this?
It's a really interesting. I said about my old organization that the dirt flowed through their veins. Right? These are people who grew up in this organization. Since they were 17, 18 years old, maybe even younger, and now they were in leadership positions. And so change in some ways, and I think the reason why people don't like change often because they take it so personally. Because if I'm changing something about you that used to do, well, that means I did it wrong. So I think what you try to do to the best of your ability is depersonalize these things. Shine a light on the problem, right? Try to be really clear about what the facts are. This is not about you being wrong or me being right. It's about, here are the facts of the problem. Here's the situation we're in. If we want to continue operating in the way that you want to continue operating, here are the facts that exist. We need more money. We need to spend less money, whatever those challenges are. This is the wrong person for this reason. And in many cases, I think being as transparent as you possibly can is the first piece. But the second piece is spending a lot of time with people and allowing them to both get to know you, but also allowing them to be heard. You don't always have to agree with people, but you have to allow them to be heard. And I tried really hard to allow people to yell and scream and cry and work through a lot of emotions about what that change may have looked like for them. And in the end, ask the same question. What do you want this place to look like? What do you want your work to do? Or what do you want to do in your work? And ultimately, if you're providing them with a better, safer, more sustainable way of work, most people come around. Now, the truth of the matter is not everyone does. And some people need to leave because the change is too hard or they're in the wrong place. But what I found in general is if people are coming at a problem from an honest place, if you're honest back with them and you put up a little bit of a mirror to the problem, not to the person, but to the problem, you can usually get people to embrace change a little bit. And you also have to be really humble, which is, I'm coming here with no history. I'm coming here with limited understanding of what you do. And so I want to hear from you what the change might need to be also. I am not the magic wizard. I don't have a box in which I can pull out change and say, here, take it. We need to together figure out where we want to go. And my job is to help lead that change is in a collaborative way as possible. There are some times when the leader has to make difficult decisions and say no. But I try to limit those times as much as I possibly can and try to move people along a path. Sometimes that's painful and sometimes that takes longer, but I find that change is more sustainable than just dictating, yes, no, this is out, we're not doing this anymore. There are some things you need to do like that, but I try to reserve those for the most important pieces of change, reputational, financial, personnel, where in any of those three categories, someone or something can get hurt, right? If it's an existential problem, then you have to say yes or no. But most decisions I find fall into three boxes. And I call them box one, box two, box three. Most decisions are in box one. You can get people 90% of those decisions. I think I'm right. Let's figure out how to get to box one together. Box three are the ones that I have to make myself. And those are black and white. The hardest ones are the box two ones, where I think I'm right and you think I'm right. I think I'm right and you think that you're right. And maybe there's some gray in between. And that's where the leadership piece comes in.
This is so fascinating and like a masterclass for change agents.
It's a masterclass, but it's something.
It,
Thank you. I appreciate
it was very fascinating,
very
and
sweet.
thank you for that. And so now I want to talk about another change.
Yeah.
Change in the world.
Sure.
October 7th.
Sure.
The day that changed a lot of people's lives, most, of course, Jews. And I wonder, where does this day cut you?
So it changed my life and changed many of those folks who live with me, for sure, in my home, and the work that I did at NJY and the work that I do now at Sid Jacobson. So my family and I are Shomer Shabbat. So we follow Shabbat, which means that there's some restrictions. We don't use our phone. We don't drive. We don't do those things. We don't use electricity. We walk to synagogue. So that happened. So October 7th happened on a Saturday night, right? Or for us, Saturday morning, right? But I keep my phone on Do Not Disturb, right? So if, God forbid, someone needs to reach me, they can. And I'm also involved in some of the work I do around security. And so there's pieces of my phone that can still come through in, God forbid, an emergency. So my phone lays on especially during that time, lays on my night table. And my wife was sleeping next to me. It was Simchat Torah, right? It was Shabbat also. And I hear my phone going off, and my wife starts to elbow me. Something's wrong. Your phone is really going off a lot, because it's not supposed to be going off at all. And I go and take my phone, and I see all of the WhatsApps coming through about what's happening on October 7th, or what happened at that point, right? It had started. And it's a little disconcerting. I'm not really sure what's going on. And like everybody, I didn't really fully grasp what happened. Rockets, and I said, Eileen, I'm going to go to synagogue. Let me just go. It's probably like 6:37. I usually don't go till about 9, but I start to go. And I walk to synagogue. It's about a 20-minute walk, 25-minute walk, really. And I get there, and then the news starts to come out, and we start to understand what's happening. The security agents that are there, and other people are telling us. And I remember just sitting in synagogue with a whole bunch of the same folks that I sit with, my chevra, and we were all, I think, trying to process this in this kind of otherworldly way, because we're sitting in synagogue somewhat safe. We're trying to understand. We all, I have family. Everyone I'm sitting with has family, close family. And we're trying to understand if the rumors are real. Is it what we're hearing real? Because it doesn't seem to be possible, right? And the news gets to the rabbi, and the rabbi says to us, it's in some way, that during these periods of time, people can turn their radios on and leave to hear what's going on. And so I took that a little liberally, and we went home, and I turned on I-24, which is the Israeli, and we left it on for days on end, Gal. It was on the news that was on in my house for days and days and days. So I think it changed everything about who we were. My kids at that time, this was so it was 3 years ago, right? So my kids were 19 and 14 at the time. My son had studied in Israel and during the COVID year 2021. So we had visited Israel a number of times as family. So this was deeply personal to us. We wanted to know about our family and our friends. One of my sons, he had done an internship that summer before. One of his professors, or one of his internship coordinators, who became the ambassador to the United States, son was killed that day. And then it turned out Omer Nutra was taken hostage. We had friends whose sons were serving in the IDF. So it changed everything about me and who we are and how I think about the world.
What was your connection before October 7? What was your connection to Israel? You said that your son went there. You had a couple of family members.
Yeah.
How connected?
So we were really connected to Israel. I had gone to Israel when I was 21 years old, and didn't go again for many, many years. We then took a family trip for I hope I'm going to get this correctly. I think the first trip we took as a family was for my son's bar mitzvah when he was 13. My wife then went shortly thereafter, I'm pretty sure this is correct, for a women's trip. I, for my work, had gone back. We and NJY, brought hundreds of Israeli campers and hundreds of Israeli staff, or 100 Israeli staff. We had lots of
mostly staff, but
staff and children.
And children?
Yeah, actually more children than staff.
Wow.
And
before October 7th.
Before October 7th. Yeah, before October 7th. They would just come for camp for years and years, way before me. We had partnerships with Maccabi Tel Aviv and government. So there was lots of business that I did. So I got to the privilege of going to Israel a number of times. And then we went before October 7th, we went then. And then we went for my niece's bat mitzvah, which would have been actually a little bit after my son's. We went for my daughter. So we'd gone to Israel as a family many, many times, or a number of times prior to October 7th.
So you were quite invested in Israel.
Quite invested in Israel.
Even before October 7th, 100%. So I can understand that.
Correct.
I understand what you feel about it.
And we have cousins and family and friends who we were worried about their safety and continue to be worried about their safety today.
And so we spoke last episode, we spoke about the importance for you to do something meaningful, to do something that really, with meanings. This is why you went to education. Sure. Then we will not go over the entire resume. So I wonder, on this moment, you're CEO of NJY Camps. What is the next step? Like what you felt that you need to do?
So it's a great question. So the whole organization deeply connected to Israel because for 30 years we've been bringing Israeli, staff and children to camp. So many people had deep connections. So we came to the office, and I don't remember the day. Probably Tuesday. Monday was a work from home day. Tuesday. But I think probably shortly thereafter, we probably wrote a message. I don't remember necessarily, to be honest with you. I think there's a lot of fog of war that existed. I think we try to connect and figure out who is where, and as a group of leadership, how is everybody, and checking in on everybody and all of those things. And then we realized a couple of things. One was our families wanted to try to connect to the people that they had met many years ago, maybe no longer had a connection. So we started a program very early on called Tikva, Notes of Tikva, where we were able to send notes from American families who had gone to camp to our Israeli families, soldiers and families. We were served as the conduit because they no longer had connection to some of them. Maybe they didn't have the email anymore. So we did that. And I think we sent dozens and dozens and dozens of notes. I don't remember those numbers anymore, but it was a big deal for us. People called us and they wanted to know, how is Gal? How is Noah? Which is only the names in Israel that people have, right? They wanted to know. We served as a hub for sort of information and connection. The federations were doing their things, everyone. So we try to stay in our lane. But you said, what could I do in that place? So about the day after I came into the office, I realized I think that these kids in Israel are going to need to come to camp. And I think not only the kids who we normally came to camp, but these kids in these communities who we could see really quickly were going to be displaced, right, are going to need to come to camp. I realized that really early on in October. And we started to have the conversation.
Because what sorts of kids used to come to camp before?
Yeah, good question. So the kids that came to NJY camps, typically they paid for camp. They were typically kids from the center of Israel. They were from Tel Aviv. They were some from Yerushalayim, but basically the center of Israel. They were typically more affluent because they were able to come to camp. It was expensive. They were more worldly. Many of them had family or friends. They spoke English. Many of them, or they all spoke English, some varying degrees, but they were more what I would call Tel Avivite, right? Those were the kids who were coming to camp, and they paid to come to camp. As anyone else did, it was a different program, and they were heads of there were Israelis who oversaw that program, but they were typical campers. We didn't have a lot of kids from Sderot, from the Atef in general. It's a different part of Israel, different economically, different culturally, different socially. Those were not kids who typically ended up in our camps. And we saw the destruction that happened. We knew, first of all, that the kids from our normal campers, we're going to have to figure out how to get them. But when we saw the destruction that was laid waste to first in the south, the north happened a couple of days later, right? October 8th. And I realized that we were going to need to do something. And I remembered going back to 9/11, that they had created a camp called America's Camp for children who had lost family members, typically parents, in 9/11. That camp lasted for 20 years. I think is 20 years, until the last child of essentially aged out. And I remember, I didn't work there, but I remember I had staff members who had worked there, and they talked about the import about that, of how important that was for those kids and for that staff. And I thought, we know how to do this as an institution, we know how to take care of these kids. So we thought about that, and that was going to be our mission. That was what we were going to do for October 7th. And then I got to go to Israel in November. A month later, David Black, the previous director, put together a mission. It was really mamash, as we say, the really beginning of the war. War had just begun, like less than a month. I think we landed on November 11th or 10th. So like
maybe
really
the war
early.
just started.
The war just started. Israel had just invaded Gaza. The war had started on October 7th for us, but Israel's response had just begun. Like the ground. So we were there. Went to Kfar Aza. We could have a whole episode about this, but I will tell you that the last thing we did was we were sitting in Daron Almog's office. Daron Almog is the head of the Jewish agency, the chairman, and he started to talk about this idea about maybe we should do stuff with camp. And we had already mentioned this, and I raised my hand and I said, General Almog, he's a general. I said, NJY camps will take as many kids as the Israeli government can send here. And he wrote my name down and wrote some stuff down. And my colleagues looked at me like, what did you just do? Like, it's crazy. Fast forward, we did. That program grew. The Jewish Agency, I think, in thought partnership with us, spread that program across North America. I think there were kids who went to Canada. And we did that for 2 summers where we brought young people from the ATEF, over 100, and staff members, to camp for free. We raised the money from generous philanthropists, and we brought them to have a summer camp experience. These were enormously difficult programs. These young people had gone through unspeakable trauma, and it was both very difficult and enormously rewarding to watch these young people have those experiences.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
Sure. So, there are like little different stories that I can think about, but some of them, one of the stories that was told to me, I wasn't there, but I completely understand where the story comes from, or the meaning behind the story was, not only did these young people have this tremendous trauma, but they came from homes or experiences where they didn't have a lot of outside experiences. They didn't travel to America. A lot of these young people spoke no English. And so one of the girls got off of the bus, as it's told to me, and she looks around and she looks at the trees and she asks in Hebrew, and she looks at the lake and the trees. She goes, is this colored? Like, this can't possibly be. She had never seen. And then we told her that she sees the lake, the Agam, there's the lake, and someone tells her there are 3 lakes. And she, on this property, or the properties of camp were very big. So 2,000 acres or something like that, on 3 different camps, but are all on the same property. And she said, 3 lakes? I've never even seen one, or something like that, right? Excused history from it. And so that was one of the experiences. And then the other experience that deeply affects me to this day was the Israeli scouts. Sofim came, the caravan came. They sing songs, and for those of you who don't know, it's like Disney World, it's like Disneyland or Disney World or the Mickey Mouse Club for Israelis, Mickey Mouse Club. They sing corny songs and they dance, and Israelis would be hysterical looking, but Americans love the caravan. And they came the first day of one of these programs, and there was a boy sitting next to me sobbing, uncontrollably sobbing. And my Hebrew's okay, but not good enough to talk to him. And I asked him what was wrong, and we went back and forth a little bit. And then one of the social workers who came and sat next to him, and he said to me, he's just so scared about the noise. And the noise was clearly just music. And I thought, and this was now, remember, this happened in October, we're talking about August. It was
almost a year.
Yeah, almost a year. And this young boy, this 14-year-old, could not sit in a room with music because he had been so traumatized by the experiences that he'd had. And I have so many of those. There's so many of those stories, both good and bad. The first one, I think, is this beautiful story. And the second one was how deeply that had affected this young person, and how much I knew that this was going to be with him for the rest of his life. with so many of those experiences with staff over the next couple of years, because October 7th was the summer of that, and then we had the following summer, in which I think it was really still very deeply part of the experience. We learned so many lessons about what it meant to be an American Jew versus an Israeli, even though we had gone to Israel so many times and had family. It was just, it has changed the way I think about Israelis, Americans, and how I think about our relationship. It's both heartening and also challenging, because as much as I love Israel and visited Israel 4 times that year, from between October 7th and that summer, I realized that summer that I knew nothing about October 7th. And as much as I cried and cared, my experiences, even being in Kfar Aza on November 12th or 14th, was just like I was a visitor. I was a tourist in some ways. And Israelis experience this in ways that Americans, even though we deeply love that country, or those of us who do, will probably never really understand. So for me, it was a really seminal moment in my understanding of the country and our relationship as people, and our relationship as government. I see some of that playing out in the way this Iran war is happening. So it's changed everything about who I am and how I think about that relationship.
So you're saying not only that October 7th changed you, but also that this encounter between American kids and specifically Israeli kids that got personally affected by the war.
Yeah, we thought we were ready. That summer we worked really hard. We prepped and we thought about all of the things that we knew had to do to prepare to make sure that these young people, staff and campers, because the staff were young also, were going to be ready, or even the older staffers, right? We knew everything. We were so confident. We were great at doing this. This organization had been running camps for 100+ years. And I say that from the top, failed them in so many ways. None of them probably were our fault, because we couldn't have possibly have understood, even though I was in Israel and we brought our staff to Israel that year to meet Israelis. And we were so deeply connected to so many of the hostages. We had hostages who were campers of ours. So it was in our minds, and we wanted to do the right thing. And we, in so many different ways and so many different times, failed at doing the right thing, because I don't think we knew what the right thing was, because it was hubris. We weren't humble enough to say, this is beyond what our experience is, so let's think about this in a different way.
Have you taken one key learning point that from this experience that you're taking to
the work? Yeah. So I think it's actually what I just said, which is that as much as I want to understand you and your husband and your kids, and I think, people joke around, maybe you should live in Israel, and God willing, maybe I will one day. I'll never be Israeli. I missed that boat. I didn't serve in the army. I have cousins and family and friends. I didn't do that. I've been in a shelter, right? A number of times, but I got to leave. I always knew that my home was here, even though I felt my heart was there. And so I think the lesson I learned is to be really humble when we are talking about Israel-American relationships. And I also suggest that for my Israeli brothers and sisters. Be really humble about what you feel about the diaspora, about America. You may live here for 3 years, but you're Israeli, just like we're American. And so we have to agree that we don't understand each other as well as we'd like to, and learn and grow together, but recognize there'll always be some barrier that's impenetrable, because it's just impossible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel that this is in part the reason that I wanted to start this podcast, to try to bridge these two cultures as much as I can, and explain mostly to Americans a little bit more about Israel. And as you said, it's not the same, but maybe from getting to know each other a little bit better, the bond would be stronger. So we're gonna stop this conversation now. We're gonna go on the third episode.
Wow. I don't know if my contract allows for this. Speak to my agent.
Hopefully it does, because we're gonna do it. So thank you so much, Michael, for this conversation right now, and thank you for tuning in to this episode. We're gonna right now start our third episode, so please stay tuned, and until next time, take care and be well.